Monday. Wait for Facebook to log in right here. We're going to go ahead and get started. Feel like it's been so long since we've been together. It's been super busy in our world. So I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. Thank you for joining me today for our Tim at 10. Today is Monday, September 28th, I believe. I should probably look and see what day it is before I say that. But today we're going to go over the professional development chapter in the Child Care Minimum Standards. Now this was last updated in October of 2018. We are expecting to get a new set of minimum standards any day now from child care licensing. However, they haven't come out yet. We are not anticipating any changes to the professional development chapter. So what we have right now is what we should get in the new book coming out. If there are any changes to the professional development chapter, if they throw us a curveball, then we'll do an updated webinar at that point. However, looking at the draft pages that were released this summer, there's nothing on the professional development chapter that would be changing. So everything that we're going to be talking about today has been in place since October of 2018. However, I have noticed that there are quite a few items in this chapter that people are still having a hard time understanding the expectations and staying in compliance. And I want to make sure that you stay in compliance with professional development. Now, before we get started on the actual standards, I kind of get on my little soapbox when it comes to professional development because the goal with professional development is to gain new knowledge so that you can be a better director, so that you can be a better teacher, be humble and hungry for that professional development. It's not about just getting your hours, all right? And y'all know that that's a little bit of a trigger for me when I have people that contact me and say, hey, I just need to get my hours. Well, we should be wanting to invest in our professional development, be humble and hungry for new ideas to grow our program and to grow our classrooms. So yes, we're going to talk about the regulations and the expectations with licensing, but always keep in mind it's about learning and becoming better. All right. So there's my little soapbox on that right there. The first thing I want to go over, because I want to try to keep this down to an hour for y'all. However, we could spend all morning talking about this. The first thing I want to talk about in the child care minimum standards is the definitions that are very important for you to understand in the regulations. There's three particular definitions that we're going to discuss here at the beginning of our workshop. And good morning to everyone that's saying good morning to me. I see you and I'm so happy that you're here and I hope you had a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And you're enjoying this fall weather that we're getting here in North Texas. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but it's pretty nice. So if you want to if you have a copy of the Child Care Minimum Standards in front of you, turn to page 5. If you don't have your minimum standards in front of you, that's okay. You can just listen and take notes and ask questions if you've got questions. But on page 5, these are terms and definitions. And those of you that have taken my 4-day director credential class, we spend quite a bit of time going over terms and definitions. Typically, when I see that a director is having a hard time understanding a regulation, it's usually because there's a misinterpretation of a term or definition. So I like to spend time on that. All right, but if you look at number 34 on page 5, it's going to give you the definition of instructor-led training. All right. I see a comment about the Facebook Live feed freezing up. If you're having technical issues, the best advice that I can give you is to be patient. All right. The internet is very, very busy these days. Everything is looking good on my end. The other recommendation I have for you if you're having technical issues is to make sure that all of the other windows on your screen are closed and that you have nothing else running in the background except for your Facebook Live. But if you've got several tabs open and other internet pages open, or you've got ProCare running in the background, or your Outlook running in the background, that's going to interrupt a good strong feed coming through on the video. So my best advice to you, if you're freezing up or having some technical issues, make sure that all of your other tabs are closed and nothing else is running on your computer. We have found that to be very, very helpful for folks. All right, sorry. So let's go back to page 5, number 34, and that is the definition of instructor-led training. And you'll see here that instructor-led training is defined as training characterized by the communication and the interaction that takes place between the student and the instructor. All right. The training must include an opportunity for the student and the instructor to interact with each other so that you can have clarification about the information that's being covered. For such an opportunity to exist, all right, the instructor must be able to communicate with the student in a timely fashion. That's really important right there. So you might want to highlight that part where it says that the student and the instructor must be able to communicate in a timely fashion. All right, that's one of those vague definitions and words that we've learned so much about this year. All right, so that the instructor can answer questions and provide additional information. So instructor-led training, of course, would be face-to-face training. It would be training like we're doing right now on Facebook Live, where it's actually happening at this moment. It's live. Now, you're not in front of me, but you're able to participate on the chat screen, and you can ask questions and you can get clarification. So this right here, what we're doing would be considered instructor-led training. In our organization at timthetrainer.com, we actually have a training hotline. So if you have an employee that's doing one of our online trainings or watching one of our videos that is pre-recorded, if they need additional information about the material being covered, or they've got questions about the material, they can call our training hotline so that they can interact with the instructor and get their additional information. And that is available to them in a timely manner. All right, so a little bit of a trick for you right there. Also, because the director is able to train their own staff, and we're going to get to that in just a little bit, as long as the director is available to answer additional questions or give additional information, that too could make it instructor-led. Now, I get a lot of phone calls and emails asking me about opportunities for face-to-face training. I hear a lot of different terminology that's out there. One thing that we really got to work on in our industry is making sure that everyone is using the same terminology, all right? That we're using the same words when it comes to meeting expectations. So we need to be using the words instructor-led training instead of face-to-face or live. We want to be consistent with what child care licensing is required. All right, so pretty simple definition of instructor-led training. That one right there is pretty common sense. We did get an email from licensing a few years ago that in their interpretation, instructor-led training has to be live. It has to be happening like right now, but it can be either face-to-face or virtual as long as it's live. That's really not what is said on page 5. Page 5 does say that it's, the opportunity to interact is done in a timely fashion. But I do believe that this is a great example of pick your battles wisely, all right? Do you want to argue with a licensing rep on that interpretation, or do you want to go ahead and just plan on getting 20% of your hours instructor-led and be nice and clean, all right? My suggestion is just plan on getting 20% of your hours live, all right? That way there's no interpretation issues. That's my recommendation. All right, let's go over to page 6. And we're going to look at number 45, and that is the definition of self-instructional training. All right, so this one is very, very important to make sure everyone understands. Self-instructional training is trainings designed to be used by one individual working alone and at the individual's own pace to complete lessons or modules. Lessons or modules commonly include questions with clear right or wrong answers. All right, so very important when you're looking at self-instructional training. And 80% of your hours can be done through self-instructional training. What you've got to make sure that is present is that there is a worksheet or a quiz or an assessment that has right or wrong answers that is completed by the participant. All right. As long as they're watching a video or watching a pre-recorded webinar or they're reading a module online, as long as there is a worksheet or a quiz with right or wrong answers, that makes it self-instructional. And 80% of your hours can be done through self-instructional material. All right, so that's pretty big right there. Here's where people get really, really confused, all right, is number 46. And number 46 is the definition of self-study training. There is a huge difference between self-instructional training and self-study training. Self-study training is non-standardized trainings where the individual reads written material, or they watch a training video, or they listen to a recording, and that's it. All right? There's no worksheet, there's no quiz with right or wrong answers, and no certificate of completion is provided for you. All right? That would be self-study, and you can only get 3 hours a year through self-study material. So basically, let's say, for example, you get the latest John Gordon book that just recently came out, and you read this leadership book, and that's it. There's no worksheet, there's no quiz. You can actually give yourself 3 hours of training for reading that book, or reading an article in a magazine, or watching a documentary on play, or a documentary on brain development, all right? But you can only do 3 hours a year. That would be considered self-study. All right, so the key here to make sure that whoever's providing the training provides a worksheet or a quiz or an assessment with right or wrong answers, and a certificate of completion is provided to you. All right, otherwise it goes into that self-study category. And I actually just recommend you stay away from self-study. Make sure everything is self-instructional or instructor-led. All right, very good. Now let's get to the good stuff. All right, get to the good stuff. And again, if you've got any particular questions, make sure you type those in on the chat screen so that we can all learn from it. Oh, I am so happy that there are so many of you with me this morning. This is great. All right, let's go to page 44 now. On page 44 is going to be the professional development chapter in the child care minimum standards. And we're going to go through the 746 book. All right, and the 746 book is for licensed child care facilities. Some of you might work at an exclusive after-school program, or some of you may work at a registered home. Your hours are going to look a little bit different if you're in one of those two categories, but we're going to stick with the 746, all right, for the sake of that's the majority of the people. I got a question from Erica that would early childhood journals be in the category of self-study? Yes, if there is no quiz or worksheet with right or wrong answers, and no certificate of completion is provided to you by the trainer, the early childhood journals that you just read, that would fall into self-study, and that's limited to 3 hours a year. That's a very good question. And there's some good early childhood journals that come out. I just got a magazine in the mail on Thursday or Friday of last week. I believe it was the NAEYC Young Child magazine. They've always got great information in there, but maximum 3 hours a year for reading that. All right, so years ago, prior to October of 2018, whenever I would do this training on professional development, I used to draw animals back here because I wanted people to understand that each of the requirements listed on page 44 and on page 45 are completely separate animals. It's our professional development farm, all right? But we tend to want to lump some of these requirements into the same category. And I need everyone to understand that all of these requirements on page 44 and 45 are completely separate expectations, all right? Now, since October of 2018, licensing has done a fantastic job of creating this chart, and it's a lot easier for people to understand what is expected, all right? So there you go. Okay, so the first expectation that we're going to talk about is orientation. And just a warning, we're going to flip back and forth in this chapter. So be ready, because we're going to be flipping back and forth and looking at different information. I know some of you that rocks your world, but we've got to. So the first expectation on page 44 is orientation to your program. And every employee, regardless of their education or experience, is required to have orientation to your program within the first 7 days of employment. Now, I like this because they are giving you 7 days from the date of employment to complete your orientation to your program. I like to spread it out because, you know, the current data is that people typically only remember about 14% of what they hear on their first day of work. And y'all remember what it's like whenever you start a new job. So much new information is being thrown at you. And typically we remember about 14% of that. So I like it that we can spread our orientation out, okay? So within 7 days. There is no rule on how this is done. So if you want to do your orientation to your program through self-instructional material, you can do that. If you want to do this through instructor-led material, you can do that. There is no rule on whether this is self-instructional or instructor-led. There is also no rule on the length of time for orientation, all right? Because it doesn't count as hours. So basically, when people call me and they ask me, how long should my orientation be? My answer is going to be however long it takes for you to get through this material, all right? But there's no set amount of time. Now, if you look on page 45 and page 46, you're going to see what must be included in your orientation to your program. So looking there at page 45 and 46, you'll see an overview of the child care minimum standards. That's going to take you quite a bit of time right there just to go through this book, all right? You're going to see there an overview of your discipline and guidance policies, child abuse and neglect, handling emergencies, the location and use of fire extinguishers. Turning over to the next page, your policy on administering medication, all right? Food allergies and which children in your program have food allergies. Your building premises, all right? Handling, storing, and disposing of hazardous waste, and then transporting children if applicable. Now, I get a lot of questions from y'all about does timthetrainer.com have the new higher orientation topics available? Yes, we do. Every one of these topics that you see on page 45 and 46, we do have trainings on our website under online trainings that cover these topics. However, they're very, very generic, all right? Because if you notice, the topics that are on page 45 and page 46 are very specific to your individual school. All right. So I can give you a nice generic template of these trainings, but you've got to make sure that you fill in the gaps with your new employees. All right. So for example, of course, the overview of minimum standards, that's the only topic right here that's pretty, pretty same for everybody. But, your discipline and guidance policy, every one of us probably have a different discipline and guidance policy. It looks a little bit different for all of our schools. Child abuse and neglect, that one's pretty easy right there too. But your policies on handling emergencies in your program, the location of all of your fire extinguishers, I don't know where your fire extinguishers are located. So you're going to have to fill in the gap on that one. What is your policy on medication? We all might have different policies on administering medication and who administers medication in your program. Where is medication stored in your program? Again, I don't know which children in your program have food allergies. I can do a nice generic training on recognizing and working with children with food allergies, but you're going to have to fill in the gap. All right, you're going to have to fill in which children have food allergies. And I actually have that like on my online worksheet. After the employee completes my module on food allergies, one of the questions is, which children have food allergies in your program and what are they? And I have that on there so that, again, they're having to do this research in your facility. Building premises, the same thing. All of our buildings are different. So you're going to have to, I can give you a nice safety checklist of maintaining a safe environment, but you're going to have to fill in the gaps with your specific facility. So y'all get the point. All right, you get the point. And those are very important topics that you do with all of your new employees. Now, you only have to do this once, all right? So it's not something that's required every year. So orientation to the program, one time, you're good, all right? Let's go on. Let's go back to page 44, and let's go to the second expectation, and that is your 24 hours of pre-service training. And pre-service is required for any new employee that you hire at your agency. It does say that they have to have 8 hours of pre-service before they are counted in child-staff ratio and left alone with the children. And then you can complete the other 16 hours of pre-service within the first 90 days of employment. Now, my recommendation to you is that when you hire a new employee, you go ahead and have them do all 24 hours of pre-service up front. Get it done, get it over with. That way you don't have to worry about trying to get those additional 16 hours within 90 days. 90 days goes by really fast, all right? And then the next thing you know, they haven't completed their hours, they're short, you're out of compliance. We got enough to deal with. We don't need to sit there and worry about getting this done within 90 days. Just get her done, all right, is what I recommend. Now, it does say that if you hire a new employee that has completed pre-service at another agency, and they can prove that they have completed this somewhere else, meaning they've got training certificates, then they may be exempt. My recommendation to you is to have everyone do it. Even if you hire someone and they did pre-service at another place down the street, you don't know what material was covered. You don't know how well they retained it, all right? And, sometimes we got to untrain people before we can train them. I want them to know, in my organization, when I hire a new employee, I want to make sure they know my stuff, my expectations, and I want to make sure they've got this knowledge. So we just make everybody do it again. All right, I think that's good. All right. I got a question unrelated to professional development, but I've got a question about hiring employees that you need them to start as soon as possible, but you're having trouble getting them a fingerprint appointment. All right. So again, not related to professional development, but I know that there's been issues getting fingerprinting appointments because of the pandemic. Licensing is aware of this. They are doing a lot of pop-up locations, so keep an eye out on your emails. We've been getting quite a few emails about pop-up locations for fingerprinting. If you are in a situation where you're having a hard time getting that fingerprinting in a timely fashion and you need that person in a classroom, my recommendation is to file for a variance. All right, with your local licensing rep. You may not get it depending on the circumstance, but that would be the recommendation if you're having trouble getting the fingerprint appointment, is to file for a variance with your local licensing rep. But keep an eye out on your emails because they are adding pop-up locations quite a bit. All right. Yeah, Erica, you know what? A lot of times we've got to untrain before we can train. We got to really take an assessment of what skills does that new employee have in their bag of skills. Sometimes we need to clean out their bag because they may bring skills to your program that you don't want them to use. So then we've got to lend them the appropriate skills. All right, going back to pre-service, if you look on page 46, you can see the 7 to 10 topics that are required for pre-service. So of course, the developmental stages of children, age-appropriate activities, fostering positive guidance and discipline, etc. If you have a caregiver that's going to be working with children under 24 months, then of course they need to have the shaken baby, the abusive head trauma, infant sleep practices, sudden infant death syndrome, and brain development. So again, the infant SIDS and shaken baby and brain development and sleep safety, those topics are only required if the caregiver is going to be working with children under 24 months. However, I also recommend that we have every employee complete these topics. Because when I'm short-staffed and I'm having to move teachers around to cover classrooms, I don't want to have to worry about who's completed SIDS and shaken baby and who hasn't. All right. So we like to make everyone do these topics. That way, if I do need to have people sub in other classrooms, I don't want to have to worry about did they receive the adequate training needed. All right. So there you go. And like I said, you know, if you hire someone that's got 20, 25 years experience and you know that they've probably done pre-service multiple times, look at these topics that are listed on page 46. These are great refreshers for anybody. All right. We probably all need good refreshers on this. So another reason why I like to do this. Very good. So let's go back over to page 44 now. And we're going to talk about the third requirement. All right. The third requirement. The next thing right here is your pediatric first aid with rescue breathing. Now, this was the big change that we had in October of 2018, is that it used to be that your first aid training was only required by one person in the group. All right. Now, pediatric first aid with rescue breathing is required by all employees, all caregivers, and must be done before the employee is left alone in the classroom. This is where people are missing it. All right. Your first aid has to be done before they are left alone in the classroom. And then they have to stay current with it, so you can't let it expire. All right. So for years and years and years in our industry, we have married CPR and first aid. And there are several reasons why it's time for CPR and first aid to get a divorce. All right. We got to split these two up. All right. For several different reasons. Number one, if you see here on page 44, pediatric first aid with rescue breathing, all right, it must be done within the first 90 days of employment, and it must be done before they are left alone in a classroom. Where with pediatric CPR, you're going to see that this just has to be done within the first 90 days. So they can be left alone in the classroom for the first 90 days without CPR, but they can't do it with first aid. So if you have a person coming out and they're doing first aid and CPR together, all right, that person's not going to be able to be left alone in the classroom until they have that first aid training. Okay, so you're going to have to find a good resource to get that first aid training before that CPR class so that you can have them in a classroom. All right, and I do have this on my website, by the way, timthetrainer.com. We have a module for first aid so that you can get them in the classroom. Now, it might be when your CPR person comes out, they still do CPR and first aid. That's okay. They're just going to get first aid twice. But in order to get them in that classroom, you've got to get that first aid training. The other reason why we got to unmarry these two, it's time for them to be separated, is that when we look at a wage and hour rule, when we look at wage and hour rules, first aid is a training. CPR is a certification. And there's different rules between time spent in a meeting and training versus time spent earning a certification or a credential. All right, so that's another reason right there. You must pay for employees' time. All right, they have to be compensated for their time spent in a meeting or training. All right, you don't have to pay them for their time when they're earning a certification or a credential. So that's a big difference between the two as well. The other thing about pediatric first aid with rescue breathing is that whoever you're getting this training from, hopefully it's me, but whoever you're getting this training from, it has to say pediatric first aid, pediatric or a similar word. If it just says first aid training, licensing is not going to accept it. So make sure that it has pediatric or infant child, all right, or some related word to that. And then the other part that people keep missing and getting cited for is that your pediatric first aid has to have rescue breathing, all right? And that has to be listed on the certificate. Same thing with your CPR. When you get to your CPR certification, that one right there has to be pediatric as well. Has to say pediatric or a similar word. So infant, child, whatnot. And the biggest thing with number 3 and number 4 is that they have to stay current. All right. This is the only 2 trainings where you're going to see that there has to be an expiration date on the certificate. All right. They have to stay current. So, for example, we had an employee just recently that said, you know, we had scheduled a CPR class. Everyone that was due to be renewed, we let them know. CPR class was scheduled for Tuesday. You know, this teacher comes in Tuesday morning and says, oh, you know what? Something came up and I'm not going to be able to come tonight. So we had to go back and say, you know, hey, you know, sorry, something came up and you're not going to be able to join us tonight. However, your CPR expires on Thursday. So you've got between now and Thursday to renew your CPR or you don't get to work anymore. All right. You're not going to be on the schedule after Thursday because you're no longer current. She suddenly was able to free up her schedule and make it. All right. All right. And again, I see someone talking about another organization that offers a lot of training courses. That's awesome. But all of these can also be located at timthetrainer.com. All right. So next requirement on page 44 is going to be your 24 hours of annual training. Now, and again, your 24 hours of annual training are completely separate from everything else we've talked about. A lot of times, the mistake that a lot of people make is they want to get the 24 hours of pre-service confused with the 24 hours of annual training. These are 2 separate requirements, 2 completely separate requirements. All right. Oh, I see a really good question about going back to pediatric first aid with rescue breathing and your CPR certification. We're going to get to that in just a little bit, and I'll show you where all of this is at in the book, but I'll go ahead and answer the question that popped up. First aid training can be self-instructional. All right, so you can do first aid training online or through a module. Your CPR certification, the skills portion must be instructor-led. Okay, so you cannot do a CPR the skill portion on a computer. All right, so the CPR has to be instructor-led. All right, but first aid can be self-instructional. Thank you so much, because that's another reason why it's time for these two to be separated. All right, I've got to separate these two, because first aid can be done through self-instructional material. CPR has to be instructor-led. So thank you for bringing it up. And I'll show you where this is at here in just a little bit. Now, on your 24 hours of annual training, if you turn over to page 47, all right, on page 47, you're going to see where it says what areas of training must be covered in your 24 hours of annual training. First thing I want you to look at is A as in apple. The 24 hours of annual training must be relevant to the age of the children that the caregiver is providing care for. That is huge right there, all right? Huge. So 24 hours of annual training must be relevant to the age of the children that the caregiver is working with. So if I have a pre-K teacher that is working with 4-year-olds and they go to a training on infant toddler brain development, all right, you cannot count those hours towards their annual training because it's not relevant to the age that they're working with, okay? So you got to be very, very careful on the trainings that you're sending your people to. Now, there's a trick here. What I recommend that you do is that in your job description, so let's say it's a pre-K teacher job description, you want to make sure that somewhere in that job description it says all employees are cross-trained to support other classrooms when needed. All right, because let's be honest, that's the truth, right? We cross-train all of our employees because sometimes I need them to work with different age groups. And they need to have the skills, the abilities, and the training to work with any age group that we place them with. Now that I have that in my job description, okay, if I send that teacher that may be assigned to a pre-K classroom today, but I sent her to an infant toddler brain development training, all right, you're going to be able to count those hours because it's in their job description that they may support other classrooms when needed. All right. So I see a comment on the chat screen about Colleen took a CPR course from American Heart Association, but it does not say rescue breathing on the card. Yes, you need to contact that provider and ask for new cards because licensing is going to require that rescue breathing to be on the card or somewhere in the synopsis of the course, all right? There has to be documentation that that was covered, all right? So most of the people that are doing CPR certifications and first aid training are aware of this and they've got it on there. If it's not, I would make a simple phone call and ask for an updated card. Good question. All right, so going back to page 47 on what must be covered in your 24 hours of training. B as in boy comes back and it says at least 6 hours of your 24 hours must be in one or more of the following topics. So you've got to have at least 6 of your 24 hours in one or more of the following topics: child growth and development, guidance and discipline, age-appropriate curriculum, teacher-child interaction. However you want to do that, if you want to do an hour-and-a-half training on child growth and development and an hour-and-a-half on age-appropriate curriculum, you know, whatever to get to your 6 hours, wonderful. If you want to have your teachers go to a 6-hour training on discipline and guidance, got it, all right? Just make sure that 6 of your 24 hours are in one or more of these 4 topics. I see a lot of programs that get cited for this one, all right? They exceed their annual training requirements, but they didn't include these 4 topics anywhere, all right? Now, let's be honest again. These are pretty generic topics, all right? So you should be able to get 6 of your 24 hours in those 4 topics. It does say at least 1 of your 24 hours must be in the child abuse and neglect, recognizing abuse and neglect, et cetera, et cetera. I was supposed to do a 10 at 10 on child abuse and neglect reporting laws last week, but I ended up having a board meeting and I had to reschedule it. Y'all might look at my 10 at 10 calendar on my website because I did make a couple of adjustments and added that child abuse and neglect reporting expectations back in there because this is a really important topic. I'm not going to go over, recognizing child abuse and neglect. We're going to go more into the reporting laws and the reporting expectations. And so I was sad that I missed that last week, so I threw it back in there. So we'll look forward to doing that in a couple of weeks. All right. Tracy, isn't CPR listed on the card considered rescue breathing? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I would make sure that it's clearly outlined. All right, moving on. If you have a caregiver that is working with children under 24 months, then at least 1 hour of their 24 hours must once again be in shaken baby syndrome, sudden infant death syndrome, infant sleep safety guidelines, and then infant brain development. You can see that under D as in dog. Again, just like earlier, we make all of our employees to do SIDS and shaken baby, infant sleep safety, and infant brain development every year. I just think it's good. Again, if I'm having to bump people around, I don't want to have to worry about who's current on their SIDS and shaken baby, who's not. And again, looking at these 2 topics, shaken baby syndrome is basically a training on maintaining self-control and, watching your triggers and knowing when you've been triggered and being able to actively calm whenever you get triggered. Who can't benefit from that training? I think we all need that, Sudden infant death syndrome is basically about awareness and supervision, not just supervision by sight, but supervision by sound and awareness, all right? So again, everyone could benefit from that training. Here's where I think a lot of people also get stuck, all right? And I completely agree with y'all that this is very confusing. However, I think licensing did the best they could with what they've got. But it says, while there are While there are no clock hour requirements for the topics listed below, your annual training must include the following: emergency preparedness, the spread of diseases, including immunizations, medications, food allergies, building premises, handling, storing, and disposing of hazardous waste. So somewhere in your 24 hours, you've got to make sure that these 6 topics are covered, however long it takes for you to get them done, all right? So it doesn't tell you a specific number of hours, just somewhere in your 24 hours, you've got to make sure that you're covering these 6 topics, all right? Where the part that I think people get confused on is on E as an elephant, is where it says, while there are no clock hour requirements, all right? Meaning they're not saying it has to be an hour, has to be 2 hours, has to be 6 hours like they've done above. They're just saying however long it takes for you to cover these 6 topics, they've got to be in there, all right? And then F as in Frank on page 48 is going to tell you the remainder of your hours, and they kind of give you a whole list of topics here that are very, very broad. G as in George, we've already talked about it, says no more than 80% of your annual training can come through self-instructional material. So 80% of your training is self-instructional, 20% of your training is instructor-led. And then like we've mentioned, 3 hours can be through self-study, but I like to tell y'all to stay away from that. Here's a big one. H as in Henry says, the 24 hours of annual training are exclusive of any requirements for orientation, pre-service training, pediatric first aid, CPR, and transportation safety training. All right, so any training that you do for orientation and pre-service is not included in your annual training. Now, hang on just a second. Okay, some of you might have noticed that some of the topics that you see that are required in annual training are also required as orientation and pre-service. So, for example, your SIDS and shaken baby, that's part of pre-service. Your child abuse and neglect, that's part of orientation. You may also have noticed that administering medications is under orientation, but it's also under annual training. Food allergies, same thing. It's under orientation, but it's also part of annual training, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll see here that there are multiple topics that your new employees are going to get twice in their first year. Okay, SIDS and shaken baby, child abuse, neglect, food allergies, medication, building premises, hazardous waste. All of these topics, you're going to have them do it twice in their first year, because on page 48, H as in Henry, anything that they do that's part of orientation and pre-service is exclusive of their annual training. All right, so that is a big one right there. Now, I would not have them do them back to back. If I have a brand new employee, you're going to have them do their orientation and pre-service when they start, and then maybe 6 months later, have them repeat those topics. And I think for a brand new employee, that's a good idea. All right, very good idea. Lori, I have to absolutely agree with you. The form that Child Care Licensing has on their website to help you track your training, it's a really good document. They've done a nice job with it. So thank you for throwing that out there, but that was a good tip. All right, so let's move on to our next requirement. Y'all are asking good questions, all right? Good questions. What training must be covered for directors? All right, so if you're the designated director of your program, you have to get 30 hours of training each year. If you're the designated director, if you're not the designated director, so you're an assistant director, you're an admin person, all right, then you're going to go to caregiver requirements. It's only the designated director that has to get the 30 hours, all right? Now, if you want to exceed and have your assistant directors or admin people do 30 hours, that would be considered exceeding, all right? And you're going to be good. But look at this. It says on page 49 that as the director who has to get 30 hours of training, it says at least 6 of your 30 hours must include child growth and development, guidance and discipline, teacher-child interactions, and then they've added serving children with special needs. All right? So as the director of the program, you also have to make sure that at least 6 of your 30 hours are covering one or more of these 5 topics. All right? I'm actually doing a training on Saturday. Catch me right here on Facebook Live or Zoom. But on Saturday, I'm doing a training on supporting children with signs and symptoms pointing to a special need. So super excited to be having that training this weekend. It also says that at least 1 of your 30 hours has to be, again, in child abuse and neglect. So the designated director also has to stay current on their child abuse and neglect training. And then if you are serving children under the age of 24 months, the director also must have 1 hour of annual training on shaken baby syndrome, abusive head trauma, your SIDS, and then your infant brain development, okay? Same thing as your teachers. It says that while there are no clock hour requirements, in your 30 hours of annual training, the designated director also must have training on emergency preparedness, the spread of diseases, immunizations, medication, food allergies, building premises, All right, handling, storing, and disposing of hazardous waste, etc. So same thing as your teachers right there. Next, on F as in Frank, on page 50, it says that if you are a designated director with 5 or fewer years experience, then you must have at least 6 hours of training on management techniques, leadership, and staff supervision. If you've been a designated director for more than 5 years, then you only need to have 3 hours of training on management techniques, leadership, and staff supervision. And then when you see G as in George, it says the remainder of your hours is basically the same training that your caregivers are getting. So a lot of times people will call our office and they will ask me or Leslie or Kevin, hey, I am the director of my program. I need 30 hours of management training. We get this phone call and email a lot. And we're like, no, you don't. Licensing says I need 30 hours of management training. My next question back to you is, how long have you been a director? All right, because again, going to F as in Frank, if you've been a director for 5 or less years, then you need 6 hours of management training. If you've been a director for more than 5 years, you only need 3 hours of management training. The rest of your training is the same thing that your teachers are getting. And I strongly recommend that you attend training classes with your teachers. If you're doing a virtual event, that you're there with them so that you can hear the same thing that they're hearing, so that you can hold them accountable for what they're learning, all right? We want the director to be actively involved in the investment of professional development of their staff, okay? So there you go. And then same thing as your teachers, J as in Jack, no more than 80% of your hours can be through self-instructional. 20% of your hours have to be instructor-led, all right? I get this question quite often right here at the bottom of page 50, 1313. When must annual training be completed for your caregivers and your director? All right, so you have 12 months from the date of hire to complete your annual training, and then each 12 months after. So your annual training is tracked from hire date to anniversary date and each anniversary date after. It is not calendar year. It is not school year, all right? It's all based on hire date to anniversary date and each anniversary date after. And you can see that that's right there on 1313. I was trying to figure out the question that was asked somewhere. Oh, nope, that's not it. All right. So anyways, I was trying to help a question that came up, but I'm going to let y'all take care of that. All right, over on page 51, we've basically already talked about all of this, but this is where it's going to go into more detail on your pediatric first aid with rescue breathing and your pediatric CPR. So this is where it's going to tell you that first aid can be done through self-instructional material. The skills portion of CPR must be instructor-led. Obviously, you cannot practice compressions and you can't practice breathing on a computer screen. All right, so there you go. And I know that we get advertisements all the time at my schools for online CPR. Licensing will not accept that, all right? Now, right now, during the pandemic, if you feel like you are not able to get a CPR instructor out to your program, you can apply for a variance with your local licensing rep, and that's what they've told us. We've had no problem getting CPR instructors out. All right. At the bottom of page 51, it's going to talk to you about transportation safety training. So basically, any employee that is involved in transportation must have at least 2 hours of transportation safety training each year. The designated director of the program must also have 2 hours of transportation safety training each year. all right? And that is exclusive of your annual training, all right? So it's in addition to the 24 hours of annual training. Tracy's asking, what if you're having issues finding in-service training in your area? Same thing, you can apply for a variance with child care licensing. However, there's a lot of opportunities just like today with virtual courses, live courses that are happening on Facebook Live or Zoom. And as long as it's live, like we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, that counts as instructor-led training. So if you apply for a variance, you may not get it because there's a lot of opportunities for virtual trainings these days. Again, if you go to my website, timthetrainer.com, and click on either Tim at 10 or weekend mini conferences, you can see that we've got a lot of opportunities for virtual training coming up, and I'm about to add some more stuff out there too. All right, so there you go. All right, over on page 52, we're going to go over an hour, just as FYI. We got about 10 minutes of material left, so hang in there with me, okay? On page 52 are going to be the requirements for training, all right? So what are the qualifications to be a trainer? So when you're out there finding professional development for your folks, you want to make sure that whoever is providing the training, they meet one of these 7 qualifications. So the first thing is that the trainer is part of the Texas Training Registry, all right? That's the biggest thing that they're wanting. Now, the important thing to know about the Texas Training Registry is that if you have an individual like myself that is part of the Texas Training Registry, they can only use their trainer ID if that particular training has been approved by the registry, all right? So, for example, I've been on the registry for a long time, since the very beginning. You can look at my trainer ID and tell how long I've been on the registry because it's a little bitty number. But you know, it used to be years ago that once you were on the training registry, I could basically train on any topic and use my trainer ID, and I could use number 1 as my qualifications. You can't do that anymore, all right? So every single training that I write, I have to submit it to the registry for it to be approved, all right? If I have a training that's not been approved by the registry, then that training has to meet one of the other 7 qualifications. So when you're out there finding good quality professional development for your folks, if you have someone that says they're on the training registry, you need to make sure that that particular training has been approved. Otherwise, it says, you know, number 2, someone that teaches higher education. Number 3 is someone that is an employee of a state agency, a physician, a psychologist, those type of people. And then number 5 says, you know, a person who has documented knowledge of the subject that they're teaching. So for example, I am a certified instructor for conscious discipline. So anytime I go out and I do a conscious discipline training, I get to use number 5 as my qualification because I have documented knowledge of that particular subject, being a certified instructor. All right. But look at number 6. It says that a director who basically is in good standing with child care licensing, you can train your own staff. You could actually do every bit of your training yourself for your own staff. All right, you can't train the staff down the street, but your own staff, you can do the training. Now, I don't recommend this though. I mean, you can do a little bit of your training. You could probably do the majority of your training. But I do recommend that, you know, you have your people trained by other people. They tend to listen to other people more than they listen to you, all right? Even in my own organization, and I'm a national trainer, I like to send my teachers to somebody else as much as possible so that they're hearing information from someone other than you know, me, the owner of the organization. But if you look at number 6, if you're a director that's in good standing, you can actually train your staff. And then number 7 is a person that has at least 2 years of experience and has a minimum of a CDA, all right, that counts as meeting the criteria for trainer as well. So, you know, when this list was added back in 2009, there were a lot of people that were freaking out about this. It's really honestly not that big of a deal. All right. Most people are probably going to fall into number 7, you know, right there. It is going to tell you down there at the bottom that we've already talked about this, instructor-led training and self-instructional training. Again, make sure that there's, you know, learning objectives, there's an applied curriculum, but the most important thing right here, number 3, is that there is an evaluation tool or an assessment, a quiz or a worksheet with right or wrong answers. We talked about that at the beginning. And then a certificate of completion is provided by the trainer. So that's the big part that you want to look for is number 3 and number 4. Look at page 53. This is a big one too. Does licensing approve training resources or trainers? What's the answer that it says on page 53? No. Licensing does not approve trainers or trainings. All right. It is up to you to go out and find quality training for your people. People call us all the time. I get phone calls and emails all the time from people that ask, you know, hey, Tim, are your trainings approved by child care licensing? My standard answer back to you is our trainings are accepted by child care licensing. All right. So because they don't approve. Okay. So our trainings are accepted. All right, the only training that is approved by child care licensing is the administrator's credential course. All right, we call it the director's credential course. That training, you do have to be approved by licensing to teach the administrator's credential course. And if you look on their website, there is a list of people that have been approved. And of course, I'm on that list. All right, but otherwise, it's up to you. I got a question very similar to the question that we had earlier, that with the pandemic, it's impossible to find in-person conferences. Most of them are virtual. Well, like I said, the virtual class, as long as it's live, that counts as instructor-led. Because just like our Facebook Live event right now, you have the opportunity to interact with me. You have the opportunity to ask questions. So this training right now, if you're live with me right now, this counts as instructor-led hours. And so, you know, we have a weekend mini conference this weekend on Saturday. I'm doing a 3-hour class on supporting children with special needs. That's going to be counted as instructor-led hours if you attend the workshop on Saturday with me virtually. All right. So yes, I understand that during the pandemic, we don't have a lot of in-person events. But if you're doing something virtually that is live, that has the chat screen like we've got going on right here, that counts as instructor-led. Okay. So lots of opportunities going around. At the bottom of page 53, this is really good right here. If you have an employee that's working on their CDA, their Child Development Associate's credential, all right, you can double dip into those hours, all right? So not only are they working on 120 hours of professional development to apply for their CDA, but you can actually use those hours to count towards annual training as well, all right? So you get to double dip into those CDA hours. That's a wonderful thing. So for example, I have a CDA course on my website, timthetrainer.com, and I changed it a couple of years ago. Instead of the participant completing, you know, all 13 chapters, and then I give them a certificate at the end for 120 hours, I realized that there were a lot of people that were using their CDA hours towards annual training. So now I have it where every time the participant completes a chapter, they get a certificate of completion for 9.25 hours after each chapter, all right? So that way it helps them with their annual training requirements. So if you want more information on that, go to our website and click on CDA. But you do get a certificate of completion after each chapter with us. I love page 54. This is another great page. If you have a caregiver or director that has completed training at another location and then they come to work for you, can you count the hours of training at the previous location at your facility? One, it says if the caregiver has documentation, and they have to have the original, because if you pop down to 1329 at the bottom of page 54, where it says, what documentation must I provide licensing showing that they have completed their training, you're going to see on A as in Apple that you must maintain the original certificates. So popping back up to the top of the page, if you hire a new employee and they come in with original certificates, you can use those hours. And then I want you to pop down under number 3, any training that was obtained within 2 months before coming to work for you. All right, so that's all you can use is any training that they've done within the last 2 months. If it's been longer than 2 months, you can't use it. All right, so it's any training within the last 2 months, and they have to have the original certificates. All right, now, even when an employee leaves you, you still need to obtain the original certificates for their training file. So don't be giving them their original certificates. That's going to put you out of compliance. All right. So when you have an employee that is working for you and you've got their certificates in their file, those documents are your property. All right. It doesn't matter who paid for it. It doesn't matter who sat in the seat. All right. That training certificate is business documents. They belong to you. All right. Now, those of you, excuse me, those of you that this might be your first time participating in a Facebook Live event with me, what's going to happen here in just a minute is as soon as we are done with the Facebook Live event, I will post a link for a worksheet. You're going to click on that link. You're going to complete an online worksheet, submit it to me. There's going to be a $5 fee for the certificate of completion, and then I will email you a certificate for participating in today's event. So for those of you that this is your first time, welcome. But that's how it works, is that I will post an online worksheet for you, and then you complete it. So there's your assessment with right or wrong answers, your worksheet with right or wrong answers, and then I'll send you the certificate. So it's easy breezy. You'll get the hang of it and you'll be thirsty for more. All right. There you go. Now, on last thing on 1329 that I wanted to point out to you is it does say that you must have the original certificate of completion in the employee's file. It does say for your CPR certification, because in order for a person to be covered under the Good Samaritan Act, they actually have to have that CPR card on them if they perform CPR on someone out in the public, all right, to be protected under the Good Samaritan Act. However, it says here that we have to have the original documents, all right? So what it's going to tell you with your CPR is that you may have a copy of the CPR certification in the employee's file as long as the employee is able to produce the original upon request. All right. So do you trust them to be able to do that? My recommendation is that whoever is doing your CPR certification, ask them for 2 originals. All right. One that the employee keeps on them, one that you put in the file. And most of them are very willing to comply. Here's the deal when we talk about original certificates. Nowadays, most people, when you complete a training, the certificates are electronic. You're getting it in an email or you're downloading it off of a website. If you're printing that certificate, you can print multiple originals. All right, so it makes it easy breezy. Okay, there you go. So we did it. We have covered our chapter on professional development. It's a lot of information, but I recommend that you pucker up and give this chapter a big sloppy kiss. And y'all know what it means to give something a kiss, right? Keep it simple, silly. I changed the last word. Sometimes people like to make this chapter really, really complicated, and it doesn't have to be complicated, all right? Keep it simple. Go back to this wonderful chart on page 44 and page 45 that licensing has provided you, and let this be your map. And then also, the comment was made earlier about the form 7520 by Child Care Licensing that you can download off of their website. Wonderful way to track your hours. We also use ProCare and a lot of the other platforms that are out there that you can use to help track your hours, and you can get that. And then the last thing I'm going to say, kind of going back to the beginning of today's session, it's not about getting your hours. It's about investing in your employees' professional development. It's about being humble and hungry and eager to make your classroom and make your school better. All right. So, look at this as an investment, because that's exactly what it is. All right. All right. Give me just a couple of minutes and I will have the link posted on Facebook for you to complete your worksheet and get hours for today. Thank you all so much for joining me. I was so happy with the number of people that were on Facebook Live today, given a Monday morning. So high five to everyone. All right, I've got a director workshop coming up on Friday about culture, maintaining a positive culture from 9 to 12. You can catch it right here on Facebook Live, or it's also going to be on Zoom. The Zoom information is on my website. Saturday, we've got a 3-hour teacher workshop on supporting children with signs and symptoms of a special need. Same thing, catch it on Facebook or on Zoom. Otherwise, y'all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week. Stay positive. Don't become complacent. All right. Continue to enforce those enhanced health practices and continue to maintain a good, healthy program for your children and your staff. You've got this. All right. You've got this. All right. I will see everybody soon. Thanks.